I'd like to begin by extending my warm congratulations to the 2020 Business Insurance Women to Watch honorees. In times of uncertainty, I think it's more important than ever to shine a light on role models and stories, success stories that can serve as inspiration. It is my pleasure to introduce our first session today, a CEO panel addressing how to build resilience, support transitioning, and lead through change in times of crisis. The panel is being moderated by Dave North, Executive Chairman of Sedgwick. Dave has an excellent track record as business leader, but is also an important leader in our industry in terms of supporting diversity and inclusion. Thank you, Dave, and over to you.
Welcome to the CEO panel. This is an exciting time for us all around the world, talking about issues that have been caused by the pandemic, caused by the economic crisis, and our insurance world as a whole just always faces crisis that our customers and our colleagues need us to rely on. CEOs, presidents are always in a position of sometimes it seems like unlimited knowledge of what's going on, or do they have any clue at all? We have a great panel today to talk about how the pandemic and the crisis that we're all dealing with is affecting us and our companies. I'm really happy to have them join me today across the world for this panel discussion. First, on behalf of the panel, I want to thank Business Insurance and the Women to Watch Foundation for putting this session together and for supporting the important efforts of promoting women and diversity in the insurance world across the world, but also what the Women to Watch Foundation has done in focusing on cervical cancer in sub-Saharan Africa and the other efforts that that group has been focused on for the last couple of years. Thank you so much for that. And also to the new honorees, 50 amazing women throughout the world that are recognized for the talents that they have, the potential to help change and direct our industry as a whole. We're very proud to be associated with all of you, as well as the 15 years of honorees that have come before you. So thank you all so very much on behalf of all of us. To get things started, let me turn to our panelists and let them introduce ourselves. As I said, I'm Dave North. I'm the Executive Chairman of Sedgwick, speaking to you today from Memphis, Tennessee. Chris Colhane.
Thanks, Dave, and thanks to the Business Insurance team for holding this event and for having me along. I'm Chris Colhane, and I head up Berkshire Hathaway Specialty Insurance for the UK and Europe.
Thank you. Chris Lay.
Thanks so much, Dave, and yeah, great to be with you this morning. I'm Chris Lay. I'm responsible for the UK and Irish business of Marsh.
Welcome. And Tulsi.
Hi, Dave. Thank you to Business Insurance for putting this panel together, and it's a delight to join colleagues on it. I'm Tulsi Naidu. I'm responsible for Zurich Group's business in the United Kingdom, and shortly going to move to Asia Pacific as CEO of Asia Pacific for Zurich Group.
Thank you, and congratulations on that as well. So the first topic that we thought we'd deal with is sort of this broad topic that as leaders of our organizations, often what we're faced with is both having a vision for the future, but grounded in today, the here and now, and how do we get from where we are today to the vision that we all share for the future. This pandemic, this crisis, has created a lot of issues for us and really trying to understand what the new now is, and a lot of conversation about the new reality. What will it be like when we return to the new normal, if it's going to be different? I thought we'd ask our panelists to share a little bit of sort of big picture. What do they think the new normal is, if there is any such thing? Or are we likely to roll back the clock and start all over again and everything is just fine? I'm going to start with new normal. Tulsi, you want to take a lead in that?
Thanks, Dave. So I've been thinking about this. I think for most people, the two prior disruptions that we reach for to give ourselves context on this pandemic is either or both of the global financial crisis and and the 2001 World Trade Center terrorist attack. I think those are the two things that I keep hearing people sort of reference back to. I suspect, and I'm saying this carefully, that none of my colleagues on the panel have either been through either of the two world wars or the last pandemic. And so this has been probably the most extreme, broadly life-changing event that we as individuals or as leaders in business have been through. I think the idea that the premise of the question that we kind of know what the now is, I don't know that we know that with any real certainty or clarity or what the next twist or turn might be. I think there is a triumph and a lesson certainly in terms of the resilience, the resilience of the human spirit broadly, in terms of putting one foot in front of another in the last several months. I think we're going to be doing a lot more of that over the next 12 months. I think there is a rhythm that has ambiguity associated with it for the foreseeable future. And I think actually broadly, most organizations, most people are doing a fantastic job in very difficult circumstances of coping with that. So I wouldn't talk about the new normal particularly, but if we do go back, I think if we go out 10 or 15 years and look back in time, I think we will say that this crisis and this moment in time represented the point where the seeds of transformation of how society works, how businesses work, how we as individuals work, will have been laid. And to those of us who are practicing executives insurance, I think there's something really important for us to think about that and think about our role in it. The way I tend to approach things is to think about known knowns and known unknowns, and sort of focus on thinking about strategy and development in the context of what we have some certainty of, recognizing that there are a lot of uncertainties and leaving ourselves room to pivot for the range that we might that might come into us, but actually starting with the hypotheses of what we think we're pretty clear on. And I would point out three things from my perspective that I think are here, that lay the foundations, and none of them are particularly new, but I think they are utterly turbocharged by the events of the last year, really. First, the digital world is here. Now, that is not rocket science. I remember being in the States, in California in 1999, and it was there then. And over the last 20 years, we've seen, whether it was the death of the physical bookstore, whether it was online retailing, whether it was development of online financial services, we've seen it all. But the last 6 months have fundamentally changed customer expectations, buying behavior, being able to self-serve digitally, how and when people choose to buy, being able to serve customers empathetically, intelligently, quickly. Those are all givens, and that is going to create a sea change in the business world. It's going to create completely new business models. It's going to create the development of businesses that are digital native, and that has implications for us as insurers. Let me tell you a little story, if I may. So a few weeks ago was my husband's 50th birthday. Now, this is a man who doesn't like a party and would very gladly be left alone to do a day's work and then have a glass of wine in the evening. So the global pandemic might well have been designed to protect him from his friends and his wife and everybody else who's fond of him on his birthday. But as anybody knows who has had a milestone this year, this has been the year of creating video tributes. And most people I know spent a lot of time going across platforms, trying to put together, knit together, edit, put music together, etc. And one of my friends put me on to this service that simplifies making video tributes. Now, to be honest, I didn't need it. I could have used the various existing tools that to put something together. But the reality of this thing was, this was a cloud-based service designed to fulfill a specific need with superb functionality, and it cleared out hours of time that I might have taken in putting together something. Yeah, so ease of use, customer experience, really high quality engineering and design. As a sideline, I got very familiar with their chatbot, so I was able to get to a human in under 30 keystrokes by the fourth or fifth time I'd worked with the service. So I think the lesson out of this is businesses that create superb client experiences for retail clients, but also for business clients, the benchmark has been completely shifted. And the assets of these businesses are far more intangible. And there are a multitude of propositions like this being birthed today in a variety of sectors. And for insurers, I think thinking about our continued relevance, both in terms of where there is retail offering these propositions, but actually in underwriting terms, how do we underwrite these businesses that we don't necessarily traditionally understand? That is going to be a big, big topic.
Yeah.
From there, I go on to talent and the notion of talent. As the boundaries between financial services and tech break down, traditional definitions of talent start to break down. We're going to need great engineering talent in insurance, which is a business traditionally dominated by actuaries and underwriters. This is not a natural conversation. Equally, the underwriter of tomorrow needs to be somebody who is capable of thinking hard about the underwriting of intangibles, crafting products and solutions for new businesses and new ways of working. The businesses that will survive and prosper are those that have a real talent agenda and an upskilling agenda that brings the best of traditional insurance together with the emerging tech world and the emerging world of digital native propositions. Last but not least, and there's a theme here, so digital native propositions, talent, and last but not least, culture. I think firms that survive over the next few years for the very long term are those that secure the trust of their stakeholders, customers, employees, the community, and shareholders. The notion of business having a singular short-term profit maximizing objective is moving in front of us. Firms that have a clear long-term purpose, that offer cultures that are vibrant and attract and promote diverse talent and put the interests of their customers at the heart of their business models will be those that survive. And we will look back in 20 years, 25 years, and say those that do survive will survive because they adapted and are competitive in a world that has transformed itself in terms of how the economy is organized between those that are tech-led and not, have attracted the very, very best talent to help with that transition, and have a culture that is purpose-led and resilient through change and through pressure. So lots of other things that are unpredictable. I think the path on localization versus nationalization versus globalization, I think that's unpredictable. The path to climate, I think the will and energy is there. The timing and the trade-off society is prepared to make is more uncertain. But these are three things I'd say, actually, I'd be really focused on building a business that sort of thought through these three trends.
Yeah, I love your story. Talking about the new app, I sometimes wonder if the last 10 or 12 months have caused leaders a little humility that, you know, arguably, I think 12 months ago, all of us had a vision for what we were going to do the next 12 months. And I'm pretty certain none of us had in it that we were going to spend 12 months working from home. We were going to, you know, not see our colleagues, that we were going to, you know, move life to videos. And maybe our ability, our sense of awareness of adapting some of these trends and concepts that you mentioned has gotten better, that we embrace that app where we might have said, oh yeah, I can do my own little video. And now we're just a little more open to another idea because we didn't see this one coming. And it would be sort of naive to think there's not another one coming, whether the next one is a technology wave or a colleague cultural wave, as you say, or customers. There could be other things, but I don't know, other comments on that opening?
Yeah, I mean, obviously I agree with everything you said. I think maybe just emphasizing a couple of things or adding a couple of things. There is a lot that we know and there's a lot that we don't know, and it's important to sort of understand the stuff that we don't know and probably go on a journey. When people talk about the new normal, I struggle with the phrase because, you know, there's so much I don't know, and I realized the last 8 or 9 months I've learned a lot about myself and about our business and our customers and the world that I probably thought I knew a bit more about. So there's a bit of learning to be done here, and that really relies, I think, more openness. One thing I think perhaps maybe I hope for is that we're in a world of greater empathy and understanding, and I think, you know, leadership with greater empathy and understanding is going to be very, very important. I think also, and Tulsi touched on this, a greater sense and clarity around your purpose and culture. You know, why are you here and how do you do it? I think is very important, because people have clearly, you know, had their eyes open differently. You can see different changes in patterns. And I guess, as we said, the world's going to be flatter, faster, better connected, and that has implications, as Tulsi talked about, from a tech perspective. But I think there are some things that we do know, you know, we know that we can renew an insurance policy without turning up in an office, for example. Some people probably doubted that 9 months ago. But we don't know that we can necessarily innovate or collaborate as well as we could do when we were physically together more often. And those are the things that I think are going to be interesting for us to explore. And it's important that we do explore them. As I said, I think it's important that we go forwards with a much more open mind than we had in the past.
Yeah, I agree. Chris, Colleen?
Yeah, I was just going to say, well, firstly, Tulsi, I certainly didn't manage through either of the world wars or the last pandemic, so that was a safe assumption to have led off with. Not sure about Chris, he can speak for himself on that. But also just add and reinforcing what both of the other panelists have said, which is this is the first situation I've experienced in my life where the longer it's gone on, the less I've understood about it and the more uncertain the outlook for the future has been. And if you go back to the 17th of March, when at BHSI we shut our offices, at that point, if you asked me to guess how long our offices would be shut for, I would have said probably 6 weeks as a best estimate, maybe 3 months as a long stop. Now we're sitting here 9 months later with no end in sight, and I have no idea when we'd be returning to a normal working environment, whatever that looks like, but with most of our people working back in offices. The more knowledge we've gained, the more information we've consumed about this pandemic, about the situation, the less certain things have become. And I agree with what you said, Dave. It's a very humbling thing as a human being or as a leader to be experiencing that.
Yeah. Hey, Chris, while we have you, there's been some references as we've talked about thinking about the culture for our colleagues that work for us. And I think we sort of are trying to put this together in terms of offices reopening and what does that look like. But at the other end of all of this, or maybe at the beginning, we have colleagues who've been isolated at home and, you know, absent from the normal interaction, the things that we've all spent a lot of time on trying to build a culture in our organizations. And maybe, so how has that felt for you, or what have you done to try to maintain that culture or evolve the culture given this crisis that we're dealing with right now?
Yeah, well, Dave, the fact that both Tulsi and Chris have already covered it shows that, you know, the cultural element of this is extremely important. But I'll start by responding to your question with just some context around what my organization does and what my role is within it, and then I'll be responsive to the question. So we're part of the Berkshire Hathaway Group, which has been going for more than 50 years. And under Mr. Buffett's leadership, it's been very clear that the culture is important, very clear on what expectations are of individuals within the organization are. And the organization with 350,000 employees around the world, it's got a very clear culture and some cultural tenets that permeate all aspects of the business. Within our part, Berkshire Hathaway Specialty Insurance, we're a relatively new business within the wider Berkshire Hathaway Group. We've been in existence globally for just over 7 years, and here in the UK and Europe for just over 3 years. And going right back to when the business was founded, a bit over 7 years ago, right from the very beginning, the leadership at the time decided that culture was going to be absolutely key to the success of our organization. And as we built our team all over the world, having a shared set of values and principles that underpinned that culture was going to be really important to make sure that people showed up all over the world in the way that we wanted them to. And for that period of time, for that 7+ years, we've invested really heavily in making sure that our team, which is now more than 1,000 people globally, everybody understands what's expected of them, and they have a good knowledge and understanding of those values and principles. And by investing heavily, I'll give you some examples of what we did. We used to have an event every year, a global event in the US, which for many years was for all members in the team globally. The last couple of years, it became just for new team members. We bring them together to sit in one room for a couple of days, and we talk predominantly about culture. So not what we were going to do as a business, far more focused on how we were going to do it and the behavioral and other expectations we had around culture as an organization, what those values were and those principles were that I mentioned earlier. We'd have regional events. So here in the UK and Europe, we'd bring everybody together and do the same thing, spend a couple of days talking about those values and principles here. We do it within product lines, we do it within functions. We'd invest in lots of interactions face-to-face, making sure that people understood our culture, our values, the underpinning principles. And that set us up really well, Dave, going into the pandemic, going into working from home. Our team hasn't really missed a beat over the course of this year. Collaborations remained high, behavior's been really good. I haven't had to worry once about people taking their foot off the pedal across our business. And I attribute a lot of that to getting the culture right going into this. Now that we're sitting here 9 months in to the pandemic, I think we're in an okay place, but I worry a lot about maintaining and continuing to embed everything that I've just talked about, as we don't have people working face-to-face in the office every day, as we can't have those physical events, which are very different from what we can try to replicate digitally through video. It's just not the same, and not the same when it comes to teaching people what it is that we'd like them to be doing, and giving people a chance to observe and learn from others. So the things I'd worry about the longer this goes on would be collaboration, which is key to our culture, and I think the culture of many businesses. While video is great, it's just not the same as grabbing a couple of other like-minded people and sitting down and solving a difficult problem. So I worry about maintaining collaboration. I worry about new team members, so people joining our team new, as well as less experienced team members not having the ability to physically sit with and to observe others and to learn from them. It's much harder to create those natural learning experiences for people, which I think is going to make it more difficult for us to maintain and embed culture as this working from home situation goes on and continues. I worry about learning and development generally. New underwriters coming into our business who haven't had a lot of experience. For most of us that grew up in the industry, sitting and watching other people do their jobs is probably the way that you would have learned the most, and that's far more difficult to replicate as well. And I worry also about communication not being as effective, and either engaging over video, through email, through WhatsApp messages. It creates far more room for misinterpretation, misunderstanding, and it does really rely on us all, in order to not have those misunderstandings, relies on us trusting each other's positive intent, trusting that the person who sent you the communication, the email, the text message that might have come across as offensive or insulting or not in line with the behavioural or cultural values that your organisation has, we have to trust each other and trust each other's intent a lot more. And the longer this goes on, the harder it's going to be, and the more we're going to need to be relying on that. So I think culture is absolutely important, Dave. I worry a lot about our ability within our organisation, other organisations, to maintain and continue to embed in a working from home world.
Yeah. Have you, as part of that, have you found any new techniques to sort of reach out and take the pulse of your colleagues during this, where we used to rely, as you said, about standing around the water cooler? Can you Have you done surveys or any other sort of global chats to get a sense of how people are doing?
We haven't done surveys. We've done a couple of small surveys, but I wouldn't have looked at those as being one of the key things yet, Dave. May come in the future, but just really ramping up our communication both ways, having more all team meetings, small team meetings, whereas we might have had our teams operating on a weekly team meeting schedule, particularly, you know, back at the beginning of all of this, we would have gone to daily team meetings, giving our teams an opportunity to feed back to us and for leaders and managers within our business to be communicating to their teams. You know, also finding other ways of trying to replicate those water cooler discussions that you've talked about. And we organise, I think we actually have a series within the UK and Europe at the moment of kitchen talk, which is trying to replicate the same thing as bumping into somebody and chatting to them in the kitchen in the office. And in those meetings, there'll be a theme or a topic to talk about, which will be what books are people reading at the moment, or what TV series are they watching, and trying to have the more informal engagement rather than just, as tends to be the case now, calling someone on Zoom or MS Teams and saying, hey, this business thing I need to talk to you about, can we dive straight into that without having any of the niceties we might have had before?
Yeah, we have a lot of high hopes here in the States of using technology, the web and Snapchat and videos and Twitter and everything to communicate with each other, but our politicians have taken over that for the last few months. And although we thought that was going to end the other day, apparently it hasn't yet. So we might get a chance to use some of that technology too if we ever get it back. We'll see. Anybody else on the culture issue want to weigh in? It's such an amazing issue for us that we try to deal with and figure out our stuff. Chris?
Yeah, I think we talked a lot about true inclusivity being at the heart of a healthy culture. And as Chris has said, it becomes more challenging in some ways not being physically together to engage. I mean, imagine having 15 people on a Zoom or a Teams call and trying to make sure that you've got the 15th person who's not so happy talking up, engaged, and so on. Some people don't want to show up on screen. It has different sort of connotations, but trying to get that inclusivity, I think, is really key. And as we've seen over the last 8-9 months, it's been a test of our own culture, and the development of that culture, but also as we think about what's happened around us in the world, from a race and ethnicity perspective, there are different things that have gone on that have made us step back and perhaps think about what we can listen and learn that we may not have known before. And I think this has been a big issue for us in Marsh, as we've tried to take these sort of 3 L's, listen, learn, and lead, into our cultural journey. Rather than perhaps driving forwards in what we thought was a very well-defined culture, perhaps we weren't listening enough to some of the things that we weren't aware enough of. And so I think we will take that forward on our journey, getting more, whether it's colleagues or indeed perspectives from stakeholders outside the organisation. So, well, what do you think? Because we thought we knew a lot of things, but we may not know everything as well as we should, and our eyes could be opened a bit better. So yeah, I think that's going to be key as we drive for inclusivity. But a great thing, of course, that's come from all of this is we've blown away quite a few stigmas, that people can easily say yes to cultural mantra, and they can live slightly differently in the real world. So whereas we may have always had a flexible work policy, not every manager may have exercised that flexibility in the way we would have liked, for example. Or whereas we have always sought true diversity in our recruitment and development, that may not have played out perfectly in all scenarios. I think what this has done is driven a lot of change in that regard, which is a great thing. And we've got to try and hold on to that whilst also doing a lot more listening as we go forwards.
Yeah, boy, I really love that phrase. It's, if anything, that I think leaders generally, certainly not any of us, have been accused of in the past, is leading first, sort of presuming we know all the answers. So if a crisis shows up, we jump in with an answer. And the idea of listening is so fundamental to really bringing our world and breaking down some of those barriers, because to presume that, you know, somebody sitting in Memphis, Tennessee, let alone, you know, the color of my skin or the gender that I have, would create certain blocks for me being able to see and hear truly what our colleagues are saying and asking for and trying to tell us. Using this a whole lot more, and listening is such a key thing. Tulsi.
Echo everything Chris and the Chris's have said. I think the two maybe adds I would put in are, I think the two ways in which the pressure of the last year has furthered our culture. One is, I think, the belief in resilience through change for individuals has gone up tremendously. Everybody, as a team, as a team of people working towards common purpose, you've had a shared experience of tremendous change. And I think that has left a real, that I'm hoping, we're not through it yet, but I think there is a real sort of conviction, less tolerance about small things that otherwise people would have walked past and said, that's really difficult to change, I'm not going to try. And people being willing to take a real hammer to getting rid of some of the vestiges that, you know, might have always been seen as too difficult. And, you know, whether it's in automating processes, getting rid of sort of kinks in the system that just had been around forever. So I think that there's just something about the power of this as a demonstration of the ability to change and change radically that I think influences the way the business works. The second positive, I think, is people feel much more of a sense of loyalty, because, you know, this has been one of those situations where the firm's instincts were to display, and the firm's instincts were to protect employees, to make sure people were looked after, that they were safe from disease, safe and well in terms of their ability to make financial plans, to cope with the ambiguity or having to balance two careers, to get their childcare organized to care. And I think that instinct being the first instinct that we were there for, that as a firm we rallied together around employees, I think that made a difference around how people felt about the firm. So I think both of those, I would say, were positive adds to the culture. And so that, you know, I think Chris, one of the Chris's said this earlier in the conversation. I think every day is different, and we are not through this by any means, and there isn't. But there are some things here that I think will be life experiences for us all in a positive way, even though you wouldn't have asked for a health crisis of this ilk.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And, you know, we, all of us, each of us, regardless of what part of our industry we are fortunate enough to lead, we have our colleagues, which we've been talking about, and the impact on them. We cannot overlook the impact, the significant impact that this is having on our customers. And I sometimes wonder whether or not the next wave, whatever the next one is likely to come from our customers, because as they have been hunkered down doing just what we've been talking about, worrying about their colleagues, their business, their economics, as they start to recover from this, whenever that actually is, their needs are going to evolve and change, I think, whether it's their financial needs or their insurance needs, or they're adapting their businesses, the then versus now. And we all have to step up to that. And I don't know, Chris, your views on sort of where the customer has been through this whole pandemic crisis, and how we as leaders need to reach out and stay in touch with their needs.
It's a great question. Look, I think we've always said, you know, our customers need us now more than ever. You know, we have those of us who worked in the industry believe in the immense value that this industry delivers. but it's not always been easy to get that message across. I would say risk has always been in the boardroom, but insurance hasn't. And one of the great moments we have is to be in the boardroom having a more holistic conversation about the value that our industry creates and delivers. But that isn't maybe the starting point. The starting point for us would be, as I said earlier, to lead with empathy and understanding. You know, our clients come in all sorts of different shapes and sizes, and they're in many different industries. Some are thriving, as you've seen those parcels coming to your door. You might be in that end of the industry, and others may be in a desperate situation, maybe in the hospitality or leisure sectors. And there isn't one of our clients that isn't going through significant change. As we said earlier, as we have also gone through change ourselves in looking at the way in which our business is organised and run and how it can be resilient and future-proofed. So lead with empathy and understanding, and try and start conversations, we always say, as we would with any of our friends and family, which is make sure they're sort of frequent and at a level which is trying to understand where people are, not diving straight in with, you know, can we start a renewal strategy meeting tomorrow? And think about what's going on in an industry in terms of the change, you know, what that landscape might look like, who are the winners and losers of the future, and so on, and how risk and insurance ultimately can play an important part in that. But what we've found in that journey, I think, over the last number of months with customers, they experience all the same things we do as organisations. They're obviously in different shapes and sizes, but the frequency of communication, you know, has been really important, and it doesn't need to be lengthy communication, and it also can be communication with many more people than perhaps you may have usually had the conversation with. I mean, you can get 12 people on a call from every part of the globe pretty quickly, and have some very efficient, broad-ranging conversations that perhaps would take a lot longer to organise previously. So you can bring more interesting perspectives and value. But frequency of communication is important, starting with level of empathy and understanding. I think that back to that listening, but also trying to understand what's really going on in the boardroom, and thinking about the role that we can play in creating value. So that may not have been what we've done in the past. Often it isn't. And that's been an interesting journey for us to explore, particularly in Marsh McLennan, the complete range of capabilities that we have in our toolkit and how they can actually come to bear in a world of change, when perhaps in the past they would seem in sometimes less relevant. And let's face it, I think in the world of risk and insurance, I'll use the word lazy, which might be a bit provocative, but I think there's been a lot of laziness over a prolonged period. And now is a time when you can really think about, you know, smart decisions, real value-adding decisions, in some cases, you know, business critical, life-changing decisions, and the role that we can play. So, let's say being frequent, being present, and thinking about the possibilities and opportunities that we have through those conversations, really, really important, and how we connect them. And it may not be necessarily something that's creating value for our organisation tomorrow, but building, you know, having conversations that build value for the medium to longer term, I think, are really important. So we've quite often used this phrase at Marsh: how can we deliver the pleasantly unexpected? And I think this is an opportunity that we've all probably had. I mean, you know what it's like when you get that phone call that you weren't expecting, or that parcel on the front door that you weren't expecting, or that person that you didn't perhaps expect to reach out to you. These are moments that you cherish and you remember, and it is an opportunity perhaps for that to happen on a broader base with more members of the team that would normally get involved in doing those things. So that's how I see it. We've actually formed a virtual client council. You know, so we used to meet you know, physically with individual clients and groups of clients. We decided very early on in the first lockdown here to create a virtual client council, which we've met more regularly and more frequently. It's been really beneficial. People are available, they want to talk, so getting more frequent feedback is really, really important. We've run more webinars and networking events and bits of thought leadership I think we clocked up in the first 3 months of lockdown, we ran more than we had in the whole of the prior 12 months, which is interesting. And attendance, I mean, actually I was looking, we did one a couple of weeks ago on D&O, and we had nearly 600 people dial in the UK. So there's a thirst for information and knowledge. Of course, coupled with the crisis that we've got, the health crisis that we have a massively transitioning insurance market, which has also added to the challenge. And I think probably most of us have grown up with the mantra of no surprises. That doesn't mean no bad news, no difficult decisions to be made, no challenges. It means no surprises, and we are getting surprises at the moment, as inevitably most people in the industry have not seen something like this before, and they struggle with how to deal with it. But so we're trying to work very much with clients to be transparent, to send as much early news as we can, to deliver options, to use the tremendous power that we now have that we didn't perhaps have in previous cycles with data and analytics, to think differently. And at the same time, clients have also had a look and thought, well, actually, you know what, we've got balance sheets that we haven't used before, we've never really had to. We can actually think about doing things a little bit differently. So in that sense, it's exciting in that we're the burning platform, the challenges create those conversations. So a lot in there, but I would say simply, if you speak to your client every day, you're probably not in a bad position to start with, and that's the way we've tried to lead through this.
Yeah, I know every one of the clients or companies represented on this call, we'd all echo that same thing about staying in touch with customers, and there's never too much, and maybe we've learned new ways. We had a question from the audience that came in that maybe is really well timed for this for that conversation. And the question that they raised is, do we have any unexpected learnings from the pandemic? We've talked a lot about for colleagues and customers and change, the stuff we have thought through. What maybe in a minute or two each, something you've learned that you didn't expect to learn as a result of going through what we just are going through. Tulsi, yeah.
I'm happy to go first, Dave. Probably my biggest learning has been to underreact rather than overreact. And I think if I go back to March the 17th or whenever, if I go back to the early part of March, all certainties about this crisis have almost invariably not been quite right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And even where you kind of thought, I think I can see 2 months ahead and here's what we ought to do. What I've learned and practiced since for several months now is actually to temper any judgment and make sure, and sort of just focus on the next step in the process rather than try to come to an overarching conclusion. Almost certainly any particular certainty over the last 6 months has not been quite right.
So asking you for the date that the pandemic will end will not yield an answer.
No. Well, it might yield an answer, but with a tongue firmly in cheek.
Yeah, exactly. I would say one of the unexpected things for me was the speed at which our organizations can react. I have a colleague that observed that we had 16% of our colleagues that worked at home pre-pandemic, just normally throughout the world. And if we would have, in our innovative culture, our speed to respond, all of those things, we would say we were. But if we tackled the question of, okay, what if we moved 75% more of our colleagues to work at home? We would put together some very bright people and spent the best part of a year or two doing an analysis of what it would take with technology and culture and economics and customer communications. And in a year and a half of thoughtful consideration, we would have come up with some answer. In the pandemic, in 5 days over a weekend, we moved from 16 or 17% worldwide to 98% in 5 days. And so the unexpected thing to me was to remember that our organizations do have the ability to react with speed, that when we see the right thing to do, we should and can do it. We don't have to put it in committee and study it and send it off to London or New York or wherever it is we send our thoughts to, but we can and should, as leaders, react. And when we see good signs, we should do the right thing.
I think, Dave, that's I'd echo that, but it's a great question. I think that something that struck me was that we shouldn't be surprised that we're actually human beings. That somehow we thought it was sort of unexpected. We didn't expect people had dogs and cats and kids and interruptions, and or if we did, we somehow managed to blank them out because we were on a mission to do something else. So so again, maybe something that we can take forward is not to be surprised that human beings have all sorts of things that come with them, which is to be celebrated and embraced.
Yeah.
And I'll share two things. One would be a lesson from the last 9 months of not making fundamental long-term decisions or decisions with long-term impact right in the middle of a crisis, unless you really need to. And if I reflect on decisions I could have made or nearly made in March, April, May, right in the heat of the crisis, they would have been really bad decisions, and holding back, being patient, taking more time to deliberate and consult and collect more information ended up making far better decisions. Either a better decision in itself, or by not doing anything ended up getting to a better outcome. So not responding too much in the middle of a crisis. And then the second thing, and I love this story coming out of the last 9 months, was for years I've been involved in discussions about electronic signatures in the industry and been told by lots of different stakeholders why it just wasn't possible and all the reasons why it was too hard. Within a week, I think, of moving to working from home, as an industry globally, we somehow solved that problem because we had to. There's something there about learning about cut through and making decisions and getting stuff done that you know is fundamentally right and just cutting through. So I think we all will have learned from that one.
Yeah, I want to shift the topic a little bit, and as Carolina gave us that introduction, which we appreciate the invitation to speak with this audience. As I said in the opening, we have 50 new women around the planet that have been recognized for their significant contributions in their organizations, in their community, in the world that we operate, and we celebrate those. And sometimes we celebrate those with a little bit of hesitation of saying, you know, there's only been 15 years of that, or we've only identified 50. And each of our organizations has, for a variety of different reasons, had renewed or refreshed or reimagined diversity and inclusion type of efforts to recognize the significant opportunities that face us in tapping people who we need at the table, in the room, helping us lead these organizations. So I wonder if the last few months, has this crisis caused any sort of new thinking or new opportunities or maybe new revelations for you or your organizations about D&I generally, which, you know, has been one of the reasons that Women to Watch exists, is to promote the continued need, celebrate the victories that we have achieved, but more to do, right, in a lot of different areas. So anything in your organizations that you care to share about that? Tulsi.
think I get off the mute button quicker is my read of that. I worked out, by the way, 3/4 of the way into this panel, I've worked out how the 4-screen works, Dave.
Very good.
I was going to make 2 observations, actually. One, I think, has nothing to do with the pandemic, but the topic of race, the topic of what the Black Lives Matter movement has done, I think, has shone us light on a topic that certainly in our business, I suspect in all the businesses around this panel, has caused deep, deep introspection. I don't think we think there's a single silver bullet or an easy answer, but my God, are we listening? Are we thinking hard and having a shared conversation on how can we change the race dynamic? That's absolutely true. I wouldn't put it down to the pandemic, but it is down to the events of the last 6 months, I think. We've had some very brave and very troubling and very difficult conversations in recent months. So that's one. The other observation I would make is I think one of the very dark sides of sort of the virtual working environment we're in and everything that we are seeing, and some of the positives we've talked about, flat hierarchies, ability to communicate, etc. But I think I am anxious on the gender topic, and I'm anxious for 2 reasons. I think the stats are there. I mean, I think it was in the US that in September, 600,000 women left the workforce and only 78,000 men left the workforce. So this sort of trend of, at a difficult time when households are trying to balance dual working, etc., there is an increasing incidence of women leaving the workforce. Some of that may just be the composition of jobs that are going, but I think there is also this question mark about, are we seeing a backward step in the composition of the workforce? And I think the other thing that these virtual settings don't help with is, I think everything is exaggerated. So if we're on a screen and there are 4 of us, and I think when you're in a room, there's far greater, it's easier, I think, to be inclusive. It's easier to work with the whole personality. Whereas when you're in these virtual settings, I think the distinctions, every small gesture, every reaction is magnified. And I don't think that's particularly helpful in a society that still is not is defined by certain norms of behavior and is not. So I think on the gender topic, on the race topic, I wouldn't use the word optimistic, but I think we're having a necessary conversation. On the topic, I'm anxious that the current dynamic is not necessarily conducive, and we're going to need to work quite hard to rebalance.
Mm-hmm.
It's an interesting Tulsi. I was just, as you were talking, thinking about some elements of that which resonated with me. I mean, one of the things about the virtual world is that your organisation becomes very visual to you very quickly, and you see your team in a way that perhaps you didn't, all on one screen, and you can see what, how diverse it looks. And that's been interesting also with our clients and the way in which we interact. And I think leveraging that positively has been a good thing, because we're more conscious than perhaps we might have been in the past about making sure we had the right level of inclusivity. But I think some things that strike me is, I mean, if we're going to change, we're on a journey and we need to continue to be on that journey, and we mustn't let up. We must accelerate the journey, whether it's for true inclusivity and diversity that's required to achieve that. But I am concerned about the ability to do that if hiring plans are dented in the industry, because changing it with the existing population of our industry means that we're not going to get there as well as we could do by growing talent differently. And so we have to watch out for that. We're certainly discussing that a lot at Marsh McLennan, how we can continue to accelerate the growing of our own talent so that we can contribute to a continual shift in the industry. I think we've leveraged the work of our colleague resource groups more during the pandemic than we ever have in the past. and that's been terrific. They're not sort of like, oh, by the way, you know, this colleague resource group's having a little cheese and wine on a Wednesday night if you happen to pop in after work. They're turning up and they're leading breakfast sessions, lunch sessions, mental health sessions, workouts, bringing thought leadership, you know, enabling many more people to connect. And so that's been a good thing. But I think also that the way in which we're working is making us think about greater inclusivity around, because of the way we work is different. Certain, for example, disabilities that we may have been more conscious of in the past are less apparent to us. You know, and those disabilities don't need to be that obvious. Often they're not. It might be that somebody, you know, doesn't like getting in a lift, and suddenly they realise that they're being asked to go up to X floor to work and what have you. So we have many, or they're anxious about travelling on public transport. So we can be a lot more inclusive, I think, because of the flexibility of the work environment and the way in which we're using technology. So it's complicated because I think we're losing a fair bit, we've talked about, by not being physically together, but we're also gaining opportunities to do things differently. But I would say, as I started, I think, you know, we just have to keep our foot down on this and continue the journey, and not think that we've won or secured any victories. It sometimes feels as if we might be feeling a little bit more connected and more empathetic and more inclusive, but the stats are still, you know, our go-to reference point, and they're not where they need to be. And so from that point of view, I think let's not leave focus on that. I would confess to not really being a big believer in the numbers as a way to getting there. If you went back in my career, perhaps 10, 15, 20 years ago, but I'm an absolute, you know, convert. I think, you know, what gets measured gets managed, and this is an area where, you know, signing up to charters and putting stakes in the ground and organising yourselves around that is very important, and we shouldn't lose sight of that.
Yeah, thanks. Christy, you want to, we'll give you 30 seconds to weigh in on that topic. We're drawn to an end here.
In my time in the industry, we've made progress in diversity overall, I think, but we've got a long, long way to go. I'm optimistic and hopeful that we'll get there as an industry, mainly because I think it makes good business sense, and it's increasingly seen as making good business sense. I think there's increasing awareness that diverse teams are better teams, that make better decisions together if they've got diverse backgrounds and perspectives and opinions. I think increasingly customers are wanting it and almost demanding it, and when they're picking insurers or insurance brokers, they're looking much harder at diversity and inclusion, the policies and the actual composition of teams that are showing up to represent an organisation. And finally, I think it's a lot more fun. Yeah, I've been fortunate to work with lots of different teams all around the world, and those that are more diverse by way of background, gender, or jobs they did previously or whatever, they're a lot more fun and more enjoyable to be a part of than teams where everybody's more the same. So a lot of work to do, Dave, I think, as the other panelists have said, but I'm hopeful and optimistic.
Yeah, and I think if there's any direct evidence of how we all, at least all of four of us, feel about this whole area, it's the amount of time we've committed to this, committed to Women to Watch, committed to the efforts that Business Insurance has taken for advancing diversity in our industry. Thankful for the, as I said, to the leadership of the Advisory Council for Women to Watch and the Women to Watch Foundation for asking us to participate in this panel. There's a lot of things that we each could have spent our time on right now, and nothing more important than recognizing and celebrating the 50 amazing women around the planet, some of which work for some of us, which we're all very proud of, but also for the things that we have to do. And as Chris said earlier, listening is a critical foundation for what we're trying to achieve. And then we need to put our listening and our understandings into action. And our actions are our participation in this. So we want to thank Women to Watch for inviting the four of us to participate. Hope you enjoy the rest of the conference, and thank you all so much for including us. And congratulations.